Well, the protesters or the attackers are clearly the followers of political parties and paramilitary groups that are associated with Al-Fatah Alliance, which is the parliamentary coalition known for its affiliation with Iran's interest within the PMF and Iraqi politics in general. We have Qais al-Khazali, who is the leader of Asa'ib al-Haq, one of the prominent members of Al-Fatah Alliance. He attended in front of the media the protests and threatened to escalate against the Prime Minister and his government. But when the drone attacks did target the Prime Minister's house, they only denied it for legal protection in the future. So we have to understand that their attack against the Prime Minister's house is part of a wider challenge or a wider target they are conducting against the Iraqi state and the possible political governmental formation that is happening post the elections. And that is, of course, in response to the targeting that they, as Iran-backed groups, have been facing. And there are very important factors that we have to consider here that didn't just happen after the elections, but it has also been happening gradually before the elections. One of them is that the Iran-aligned militias belonging to most of the political parties which are leading this anti-government protests, it witnessed a major setback in its popularity since they were the main perpetrators, if you may, that were committing the political violence against the peaceful protesters from against the October protest movement since October 2019. And they're also the very same protests that consisted of discourse that carried a heavy critique towards these Iran-aligned militias and their involved corruption and activities in the Iraqi state and against Iraqi civil society actors. We also have to consider that Iran's attempt to empower the PMF and increase its dominance over the PMF led to this gradual distancing of groups that are known for being aligned with the clergy of Najaf, and mainly Ayatollah Ali Sistani. And this led to a major breakup within the popular mobilization forces. And then finally, you have the early elections of 2021, which we previously mentioned, that the Fatah Alliance, which is arguably most of the protesters' followers or supporters, they won 17 parliamentary seats in this election, which is in contrast to 48 seats in the 2018 parliamentary elections. Therefore, this is seen as a huge loss to their parliamentary influence. And finally, the upcoming government is most likely going to be formed in agreement between the Sadr's leader, Muqtada al-Sadr, and Mohammed al-Halbousi, who's the Speaker of Parliament, the current one, and Barzani's KDP, with most likely the potential continuation with Prime Minister Kadhimi taking over another term. And all of these political leaders and groups are in favor to limit the powers and roles heavily played and increased by the Iran-aligned groups within the PMF for the past few years. Therefore, these attackers or protesters are using their last method of pressure, which is violence and militarized destabilization's attempt, since, as we mentioned, they lack the parliamentary influence and are facing a major popular opposition, which heavily grew out of their violence towards the October protest movement activists.
Okay. Now, pro-Iran groups are saying that the assassination attempt was staged by Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi. Now, how do you evaluate the statements of the pro-Iran groups who are being blamed for chaos and confusion and who have also denounced the results of the parliamentary elections?
That is a very unexpected response. As we mentioned, they need to say that for their own legal protection, to not be legally persecuted for attacking the Prime Minister's house. They have been threatening the Prime Minister and the government and the governmental forces publicly in front of the media cameras and publicly on their social media platforms. It is just a final legal protection. They also accused a third party, which they have also been using. That is the same terminology they were using when they were also publicly attacking and intimidating and kidnapping the October protest movement protesters. So it is expected that they will deny it, but it is also unexpected that they will continue such a denial 24 hours after a public statement of them threatening to attack the government and the Prime Minister.
Okay. Now, lastly, Zeidon, the incident's being condemned by world leaders and the international community alike. Do you believe another such incident is imminent, considering the political instability and civil unrest as a whole that has gripped Iraq?
Well, as we looked into it, it is their last method or tool of pressure. They know they don't have the parliamentary influence anymore. They know Iran isn't as effective and influential in a post-October protest movement Iraq. There is a major anti-Iranian interventionism discourse that grew out of the young protest movement since October 2019. The last method of violence that they're using against the government, and it's also not against Prime Minister Kadhimi's government. It's also against Muqtada Sadr, who got the Sadrist movement got the highest votes in the early elections, around 73 seats in the parliament. It is an attack against him and his potential formation of the government with Al-Halbousi and Barzani and possibly other political leaders from the early elections. It is a message to him that they will not accept a government that will not guarantee them protection and guarantee them a continuous role in a future governance.
Okay, Zeidon, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your time and analysis.